All right, I think we will jump in. My name is Jen Eckerly. I'm the Executive Director of the California Ocean Protection Council. I also serve as Deputy Secretary for Oceans and Coastal Policy for the California Natural Resources Agency. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am going to pass it over to Mike Escrow, who will get us going here on our discussion about achieving 30 by 30 in coastal waters.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jen. Yeah, good to see everybody here. We've got just a little bit over 50 participants, so lots of interest in 30 by 30 in coastal waters, which is awesome. I'm Mike Escrow. I lead our biodiversity, tribal affairs, and international work here at OPC, which includes our work on 30 by 30 in really close collaboration with Jen, my colleague, Dr. Stacy Lewis, who I also see on the webinar. So today we're going to be
sorry, go ahead.
A little bit. Can everybody make sure they're muted? And some background chatter. Thank you. Yeah, today we're going to be taking a little bit of a deeper dive into what's next for 30 by 30 in coastal waters, really building on, for those of you who attended or tuned in to our June 10th council meeting, where we kind of laid out our roadmap and our vision for the next 5 years. So just to get us started here, the goals really for today are to provide a refresher on that roadmap to achieving 30 by 30 in coastal waters, and to take it that next step by sharing a little bit more detail about our evaluation process for what's included and what's not included in 30 by 30. And related to that, to share next steps for those areas that have yet to be evaluated for their possible inclusion as 30 by 30 conservation areas. And then just kind of overarching to really improve transparency and clarity in how we're doing this work and how we're making decisions about 30 by 30. So just to ground ourselves in our 30 by 30 goal, in 2020, Governor Newsom issued an executive order which committed our state to conserving 30% of lands and coastal waters by 2030. That's what we mean by our 30 by 30 target here in California. And a couple of years after that, the state released this Pathways to 30 by 30 document, which really kind of broke new ground in establishing a definition for what a 30 by 30 conservation area is, what it means to be conserved, and then also establish 10 pathways for how we are going to get to 30 by 30. And the definition of a 30 by 30 conservation area, this is probably review for some of you, but has two really important elements. So 30 by 30 conservation areas essentially need to be durably protected, principally for environmental benefit. And parsing out exactly what that durable protection and what that environmental benefit is a little bit complicated, especially in coastal waters. And so that's where this roadmap that we presented back in June comes in. And this roadmap really is intended to set forth not just kind of how we're interpreting the definition that I just shared with you for coastal waters, but also what our next steps are to get us to 30%. Per the roadmap, we are at 21.9% of coastal waters already conserved. So that includes our state's marine protected area network, very strongly protected network from the Oregon border to the Mexico border, spans the entire coastline, 16.2% of our coastal waters, which really is the foundation of how we're achieving 30 by 30. But we also want to build a big tent movement in California. And so we're also looking at other areas like tribal stewardship areas, an example of which is the new Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary, as 30 by 30 conservation areas as well. So what we've counted at the time of the publication of the roadmap is the just about 16% covered by the state's MPA network, just about 6% covered by the Chumash Heritage Sanctuary, and then just a handful of acres from the University of California Natural Reserve System. And all of that together gets us to 21.9%, which just leaves us a little bit over 8%, or 275,000 acres to go in the next 5 years here at the halfway point of the 30 by 30 initiative. And today, the remainder of the webinar is going to be actually fairly technical about data sources and how we're making some of these decisions about what counts and what doesn't. So we are going to take a pretty deep dive, but I want to also emphasize here that, as much time as we want to spend on these science and policy questions about what counts and what doesn't, I don't want to let that detract from where we're really focusing most of our energy, which is moving forward, right? So how are we going to conserve those additional 275,000 acres by 2030? And in the roadmap, we lay out those 4 key approaches by sustaining ongoing adaptive management of the MPA network, really looking to work with our federal partners to strengthen biodiversity conservation in federally managed national marine sanctuaries, supporting tribally led conservation, and then also exploring the role of all of these different other kinds of marine managed areas or designations, lines on a map in coastal waters, and what effect those or what positive impact those might have for biodiversity. So as we go through some of this more technical detail, just keep those in the back of your mind as really the 4 main fronts on which we're driving to get to 30. Okay, so time for some policy details. So in the roadmap, there is a decision tree. And the decision tree is basically how we are parsing out that definition, how we are defining durably protected principally for environmental benefit. And I'm not going to go through all of it right now, but it basically lays out some different decision points about different aspects of these different types of marine managed areas in coastal waters, and basically kind of funnels you to either a yes or a no, depending on how durably conserved these areas are. We noticed that there were some questions about the decision tree in the roadmap. So I'm highlighting a few here, kind of these really key decision points. Well, what data are you using? How are you making those decisions? And so coming out of our June 10th meeting, really we heard loud and clear that there were still some unanswered questions about exactly what we're evaluating with the decision tree. So is it individual areas? Is it categories or types of areas? There was some confusion about what OPC has already evaluated versus what still needs to be evaluated. And then also some questions on what the information and data sources that we were using to conduct those evaluations. So we really want to try to clear some of that up today. In the lead up to our next council meeting, where we're going to be providing yet another informational update, kind of diving into some specific decisional criteria. So just to start off, some of our key information sources. So what are we evaluating? We are using as our authoritative data source this product called Protected Seas Navigator. And Protected Seas is a non-governmental organization that spent many years pulling together this global database of all of the different types of marine managed areas, not just in California, but actually around the world. So it's free, open source, interactive, and it's very, very comprehensive. You can see this is just a little snapshot of my backyard here, which is the Monterey Bay. You can see all of those different kinds of intersecting lines. Just gives you an idea of like what a complicated and overlapping mosaic really California's coastal waters are in terms of those spatial protections. So we have downloaded in terms of, we have both GIS and we also have it literally in a giant spreadsheet, all of the publicly available information on this website, and it is 400 plus marine managed areas that we are walking through individually on a site-by-site basis. So we're making decisions at the individual site level about what counts and what doesn't for 30 by 30. And we are also using this best available science, publicly available information. So I think those are the 2 really key points. This is our data source, what we're using, and these individual sites in Protected Seas inventory are what are getting funneled through that decision tree. So just a huge shout out and thank you to all the work that the Protected Seas team has done in pulling this incredible global inventory together. We're also using another data source called the Marine Protection Atlas. And this is another free, open source, interactive, regularly updating database of MPAs around the world. But unlike Protected Seas, which we're basically just using as the inventory, the MPA Atlas focuses on marine protected areas, which are areas that are set aside for conservation, and it scores them or assesses them using this tool called the MPA Guide. And if you'll recall, if you're familiar with the roadmap, in the roadmap, we specifically highlight that we're going to be making decisions about MPAs using the MPA Guide. Well, we're not doing those evaluations ourselves. That's too subjective, we're too close to it. We want to make sure that we're using, again, an authoritative data source, providing some degree of that distance and that scientific independence. And so we are using the scores that are on MPA Atlas to determine an MPA's level of protection as we march through that decision tree. MPA Atlas is a product of the Marine Conservation Institute. Many of the folks at the Marine Conservation Institute were co-authors on the MPA Guide, which was originally published in Science about 4 years ago now. And we are in very close communication with that team so that as we work our way through, sometimes some questions come up, right? And so we're able to go to that team and talk with them about, exactly why, for example, I believe this is Point Reyes here in this screenshot, why Point Reyes was assessed as lightly protected per the MPA guide. So protected seas is the inventory. That's what we're marching through site by site. When we get to an MPA, we then go to, in that inventory, we then go to MPA Atlas to determine that MPA's level of protection. So we're going to back out for a second and just look at the decision tree holistically and look at some of those questions that we ask in the decision tree and dive a little bit deeper so you can get some background on how we're making these key decisions. So there are 3 different types of areas that we're considering as potential 30 by 30 areas, conservation areas: tribal stewardship areas, marine protected areas, and then areas that are not formal marine protected areas, but still may have some kind of biodiversity benefit. So let's start here with tribal stewardship areas. The question we ask in the decision tree about tribal stewardship areas is basically, is the site collaboratively managed with tribes in ways that achieve significant biodiversity benefits? And so specifically what we're looking for here is there some kind of formal co-stewardship agreement in place between tribes in the state of California? And is there a management plan that supports biodiversity conservation? So for example, the Chumash Sanctuary checked both of these boxes. The state will be formally, with the federal government as well, co-stewarding this area with tribes. And the management plan has tribal priorities integrated throughout that focus on biodiversity. And so we're going to be working very closely with the tribes that are involved in the management of the sanctuary to ensure that those tribal priorities for biodiversity conservation are actually executed and carried out, right? So this is tribal stewardship areas. Next, we'll move on to marine protected areas. And once again, these are areas of the ocean set aside for long-term conservation and basically listed in the World Database on Protected Areas. That's yet another global database, not California specific, but lists all of the different MPAs around the world. And examples of MPAs in the protected seas inventory, most of us would probably think about the state MPA network or maybe national marine sanctuaries, but there are other things in there that count as MPAs that are listed in this World Database on Protected Areas. So that's things like national estuarine research reserves or national seashores, the coastal portions of national parks. So there is actually a pretty big universe of things that we are considering MPAs that would go down that MPA side of the decision tree. Now, when we're looking at an MPA in the decision tree, we ask, what is that MPA's level of protection? And that's where we go to the MPA guide, or more specifically, MPA Atlas, because they've already done the assessments using the MPA guide. So if something is fully or highly protected, it's a 30 by 30 conservation area. That's where we're setting our bar. If it scores as minimally protected or incompatible with conservation, it is not a 30 by 30 conservation area. And then in the decision tree, it says that if an area scores as lightly protected, well, we need to do a little bit of additional assessment, right? We want to understand why exactly is that MPA scoring as lightly protected, because lightly protected MPAs, it's a pretty big bucket. Some may be pretty close to minimally protected. They may not be doing all that much. But some MPAs, at least in terms of biodiversity conservation, but some of them might actually be closer or maybe even functionally equivalent to a highly protected MPA, just depending on what the actual permitted activities are. And so that's where we're going to be taking that closer look. We're developing more detailed criteria for that, that the council directed us to come back in September and present. So we'll be making those detailed criteria for lightly protected MPAs available at our council meeting in September. Then we come to the non-MPA areas. So these are areas that are not formal MPAs. They weren't necessarily set aside for conservation. They're not in the World Database on Protected Areas, but they are still marine managed areas in our protected seas inventory. It's maybe about like somewhere between 30 to 50% of what's in the inventory is non-MPA areas. And some examples here include fishery management areas, like groundfish conservation areas or essential fish habitat, and water quality protected areas as well. Also, vessel speed reduction zones is an important one. So with these non-MPA areas, the question we ask here, admittedly a little bit broad, even if it's not an MPA, is it still managed in a way that achieves significant biodiversity benefit? And to do this, this is where we also need some more detailed criteria that our council has asked us to present in September. So in September, at the end of this month, on September 30th, we're going to be presenting those detailed criteria for the lightly protected MPAs, as well as for the non-MPA areas, so that these broad questions we're asking about those different types of areas, we can translate that into actual check boxes, right? Is this allowed? Is this allowed? Is this happening? And that'll enable us to determine yes or no for a 30 by 30 conservation area. Okay, what has already been evaluated? So picture in your mind that giant spreadsheet, again, publicly available, of those 400 different types of marine managed areas in California. In the lead up to our roadmap, we looked at everything that was fully or highly protected. That automatically counts as a 30 by 30 conservation area. So that's the entire MPA network, but also some areas that they didn't contribute to our percentage, but because they're fully overlapped by an MPA and we can't double count. But according to the decision tree, they still qualify as 30 by 30 conservation areas. So a good example would be Elkhorn Slough National Estuary Research Reserve. That area is fully protected. So it counts per the decision tree, but there is an MPA on top of it. So it was already counted within the network. So I don't want to get like too deep into like how the maps work or anything like that, but basically, just so you know, we'll in September come out with that full list of everything that we are counting as a 30 by 30 conservation area, even if it's overlapped with MPAs and doesn't contribute to, like, doesn't add to that 21.9%. We've also ruled out, because these are not 30 by 30 conservation areas per our decision tree, all of the minimally protected or incompatible MPAs. And we've done an initial review of the non-MPA areas, just kind of skimming through to see, are there any that are really obviously contributing to biodiversity? An example are those UC natural reserves. So those are set aside for research and for recreation, and they're very clearly contributing to biodiversity outcomes. So we did an initial review of those, and that is how we got to the 21.9% that's in the roadmap. But we haven't evaluated everything yet. So like I mentioned, we still need to assess the lightly protected MPAs that are in the inventory, and we still need to do a more detailed assessment of those non-MPA areas, and that's where those criteria that we're about to release later this month are going to come in. So those criteria are going to be shared at our September 30th meeting. And again, they're going to be fairly specific, but just to give an idea of the types of questions we want to ask about these areas is basically, first of all, are they real, right? Are they just lines on a map, or are they actually operational and in force on the water? Are they monitored? Are they managed? Are they achieving real results? And then to what extent is the site protected from extractive or destructive activities that could negatively impact biodiversity? So the next steps for conducting this evaluation, once we present the criteria and hear feedback on the criteria, we're going to be conducting this evaluation in really close collaboration with the agencies that actually manage these areas, as well as tribes, the academic community, conservation NGOs, fishing communities. We are likely going to be needing to do a pretty deep dive into what's actually happening at the site-by-site level for these areas. And so we want to be talking to the people who know these areas the best. And I want to call out that Marine Conservation Institute. Again, we're starting to really develop a great partnership with them that we expect will be part of this evaluation as well. And so we should be able to share results of this analysis by early 2026, as well as recommendations, right? So again, it's not just about what counts and what doesn't, but also about, okay, if an area doesn't count now, are there ways in which protections could be strengthened or stewardship activities could be supported that would bring that area up above our bar, so it would count as a 30 by 30 conservation area. So I am going to stop there. I know that was a lot. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can all see each other. And oh, we're almost at 100 folks now. That is awesome. Very exciting. So I know that was a lot and pretty technical, but I want to make sure we've got time. We've got about 40 minutes now for questions and discussion. We want to hear kind of how this is landing with you, if this answers a lot of the questions that some folks had coming out. of that June 10th council meeting. If you kind of need us to back up a little bit and sort of explain why we're in these technical weeds, that's fine too. But open to discussion. And Jen, Stacy, no pressure, but if there's anything that you guys would add to that presentation, I'm definitely happy to hear.
Nothing to add.
Lots of great information, Mike. I encourage everybody when seeking to ask questions to please raise your hand and we will make sure you're unmuted. Otherwise, if you can keep yourself muted until it's time for you to speak, that would help everybody in this large meeting. Thank you.
I will just add, if you are not comfortable raising your hand and coming off mute, you are welcome to put your question in the chat.
Not seeing any hands or questions in the chat. Maybe to kind of spark discussion, I might ask if you were one of those folks who had some questions for us coming out of the June 10th council meeting, specifically about kind of how we were conducting these evaluations. It'd be super helpful to hear if this helped answer some of those, if there are still some unknowns or anything that we could clear up. Again, the goal of today is really to just improve that transparency and clarity around how we're doing this. Okay, I'm seeing some questions roll in the chat. So I see a question from Ann and a question from Kevin, both about the Chumash Sanctuary. How does Chumash meet the standards for conservation? And why are we counting Chumash but not the other sanctuaries? So to address the Chumash, kind of both of those Chumash questions, Chumash Heritage Sanctuary is very unique in California in that it is the only sanctuary in California coastal waters to be co-managed with tribes. And it's a brand new sanctuary. This is a brand new setup in terms of this co-stewardship agreement. We're really hoping it can serve as a model for other sanctuaries in California. But because of that tribal co-stewardship and because of the way that tribal priorities really drive the management plan, we are considering Chumash to be a tribal stewardship area. So it's special. It's different from these other sanctuaries. Now, we're going to be really involved and closely tracking how that tribal co-stewardship is supporting actual biodiversity outcomes. So the story isn't over yet. And actually, our council has directed us to come back probably in another 6 to 9 months as the state, is involved in the management, the co-management of the sanctuary, to really report on how that tribal stewardship is benefiting biodiversity. But for now, we are counting it because of that really special tribal stewardship component. And we hope that that paves the way for us to be able to count other tribally managed areas where the state plays a role as well. Other sanctuaries don't have that aspect. And so other sanctuaries right now score as minimally protected. So for us, they don't count now. But again, that doesn't mean that we're closing the door on sanctuaries forever. We want to work. One of our 4 pathways actually is to work with sanctuary managers to see if there are other ways that we could strengthen biodiversity conservation in those other sanctuaries. And some of the things that have been highlighted for us include kelp restoration, eelgrass protection, vessel speed reduction, and whale ship strikes, water quality. So I think there are a lot of ways, even though the sanctuaries are scoring as minimally protected and don't count now, there are a lot of things we could work on with the sanctuaries to bring them up so that they maybe portions of the sanctuaries could count in the future. Let's see, are artificial reefs off the table if they were to be designated as no-take areas? That's a good question. I think we would have to probably balance what the biodiversity impacts might be of the artificial reef itself, right? The infrastructure of that reef on the seafloor. So that's not really a case we've run into yet, but not to say we wouldn't in the future. I think we'd want to take both the protections associated with that reef and then the biodiversity impact itself in making a determination about an artificial reef. Question from Jen Cassell. Good to see you on here, Dr. Cassell. Are there contingency plans for if the federal government reduces or eliminates proper management of the sanctuaries? Yes, absolutely. If a sanctuary, including Chumash, were no longer to be enforced on the water or achieving those biodiversity outcomes, we would have to revisit the decision we made about it. Ricky asked, glad to see the MPA guide is being used by OPC. Will the Department of Fish and Wildlife also be using the MPA guide? Ricky, I'm not sure I'm tracking your question because we're using the MPA guide here for a very specific purpose in evaluating MPAs for 30 by 30. And the department is really focused right now on MPA adaptive management, which the MPA guide doesn't really figure in there. So don't want to put you on the spot, but you're welcome to come off mute and maybe elaborate a bit, or not sure if that what I just said was helpful.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mike. Yeah, I was wondering with respect to the level of protection, it appears that the CDFW is applying kind of the 2009 level of protection kind of evaluation of is it highly or is it minimally protected, which would be a different set of criteria compared to OPC. And I just wondered if there was any conversations about coordination and using, the same criteria for identifying which sites are lightly or fully protected.
Mike, can I take this one?
Yeah, please.
Thanks for the question, Ricky. I want to just make sure that we're really clear about the distinction between the analysis that we're doing here for the purposes of 30 by 30, which is different than the work that the department and the commission is doing as part of their adaptive management process for marine protected areas. So the level of protection that was identified and applied for the design and the adaptive management of the MPA network is focused on fishing only. The MPA guide has a set of 7 or 8 different threats that go into that level of protection evaluation. So there are different applications. While the adaptive management of the MPA network is a part of our 30 by 30 approach, these are kind of separate efforts and separate analyses. So hopefully that provides some clarification.
Thanks for that, Jen.
Thanks, Jen. Super helpful. And thanks for the question, Ricky. I see a question from Aubrey about water quality that, Jen, you got in the chat. So thank you. I'll also flag, Aubrey, that is a priority, a target in our new draft strategic plan, strengthening water quality protection in MPAs. So definitely still very much a priority for us. Kim asks, can you list all of the types of non-MPA areas that are under consideration for counting towards 30% now, or with an increase in biodiversity management there? Yeah, just in terms of really broad categories, Kim, that would be fisheries management areas, vessel speed reduction zones, water quality protected areas, and I think most of the non-MPA areas that we're thinking about fall into one of those big buckets. There may be a couple others that are a little bit like niche and specific, but those are kind of the big ones that we're looking at. Fisheries management and water quality protection areas in particular. And Sean, hope that kind of helps with your question about, can you provide more examples or expand a little on what a non-MPA area would be? So maybe just to dig into like the fisheries example a little bit, one area that we're looking closely at is essential fish habitat. So essential fish habitat is area that is designated as being really important for different species or species groups. It has different kinds of protection. Different types of EFH have different kinds of protection. And so we're looking at kind of like, even though those aren't formally designated as marine protected areas, they were designated really for a fisheries management purpose to support, habitat that's important for spawning or something like that. They're still maybe providing significant biodiversity benefit in terms of protecting the whole ecosystem, the structure and the function. We haven't come to a decision on that. So I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but that's an example of a type of area that we're looking at closely. Isabel asks, for MPAs that have already been evaluated using MPA Atlas, will there be any ground truthing with local agencies, groups, or scientists to see if this is really true? For example, an MPA that is fully or highly protected, but on the ground there's no enforcement and thus not highly protected. Yeah, I mean, for us, we're really starting with those lightly protected areas as the areas that need the most scrutiny. But of course, if if something were to come up that made it clear, hey, there might actually be a problem with enforcement in this particular area, or some kind of adaptive management, we'd be open to looking at that and seeing, again, kind of in that spirit of like what action can we take to support better ocean conservation, to see if we could support improved water quality in an estuary, for example. So not like a part of our workflow for every single MPA, but certainly something that we're open to depending on the situation. Sherry
Mike,
asked,
you want me to take one? I don't want you to have to rapid fire all these. I'm happy to take one.
Sure, you want to take Sherry's?
I was going to take Raphael's about just because I was focused.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, about like how do we account? So the question is, how do you account for potential new activities, wind farms, microalgal farms, marine carbon dioxide removal when we're defining potential conservation areas? Or how do we account for them in the guidelines? So one of the things that this has come up several times, like, is there going to be kind of an adaptive management process for us identifying and qualifying 30 by 30 conservation areas? Is there going to be some kind of look back should the conditions in the water change? And the short answer is yes, right? If we set aside an area, I'm going to give an example that is not going to happen in state waters because we have banned offshore oil and gas drilling. But let's say we created an area that was a 30 by 30 conservation area, and then at some point, someday, there's offshore oil and gas drilling in that area. That would no longer qualify as a 30 by 30 conservation area. It doesn't meet that high bar of providing ecosystem level benefit. So we would reevaluate.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen. Sherry's question, are you considering the sustainability of commercial fishing in your analysis? Yes, absolutely. So that's one of the things that we want to look at closely as we're looking at, like, particularly those lightly protected areas. What is causing them to score as lightly protected and not highly protected? And if it's fishing, what specifically is the biodiversity impact of that fishing gear type, for example, or whatever it might be. So that's definitely, yeah, something that we want to take a close look at. And again, the MPA guide is a global tool, right? And it's really useful for sort of these rough cut, like evaluations, fully, highly, minimally. But then when it comes down to the details, we really need to think about the specific impact on biodiversity in the California management context. So short answer, yes, we are thinking about that. Commercial and recreational fishing.
I can take one. I can take Stephanie Mitchell asked, can you describe the thresholds for non-MPA areas, so vessel speed reduction, water quality areas, needed to achieve to be considered durably protected? So I think Mike shared the definition of durably protected. It basically needs some kind of formal rulemaking or some similar process that is not easily undone by like a decision maker like me. And so we will be looking at all of these areas to determine their durability. So a good example of this is essential fish habitat areas that are set aside for the purposes of, protecting habitat, but for certain fish species. And we do need to do a deep dive into kind of the durability of those areas, whether once we hit our targets for improving fisheries, do those places stay? Or are they then revisited and those areas are removed? So that is an example of a non-MPA area where we need to dig into actually both the question of durability and the ecosystem level of protection that area is providing. So hopefully that answers the question. Oh, I see a hand up.
Yeah, let's get some other voices in this Zoom room. Hey, Chris, good to see you.
Hey, Mike, Jen, good to see you guys. Good to be with you guys this afternoon. I apologize if you've already answered this or if this has already been touched on. But in regards to the lightly protected areas of the MPA system, in the network, are those already counted in the 21.9%, or is there a potential to where if they're disqualified, does that percentage goes down? Or I'm just wondering, or getting clarity on that.
Got it. I think what you're asking is there are individual MPAs within the state's MPA network. And what happens if those are lightly protected?
Correct, yeah.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. So we are treating the MPA network essentially as one giant mega protected area that is fully and highly protected. The reason for that is because if you look at them individually, first of all, it's like 90+% fully and highly, but also because it was designed to function really as this ecologically connected network. And also because MPAs are going through their own adaptive management process, we didn't get down to the level of individual MPAs within the MPA network. We're counting the whole 16.2% towards 30 by 30 because again, functionally, it's like one giant ecologically connected protected area. So does that clear things up? I know we've had that question from other people too, so always good to address that one.
Yeah, it does. I was just wondering, you had mentioned the lightly protected areas, and so I was just wondering, okay, are those MPAs that you're speaking of, or are there additional areas that, depending on evaluation or further evaluation, that could potentially be counted as conservation or towards 30 by 30, basically?
Got it. Yeah. So those lightly protected are MPAs that are outside of the state MPA network. So MPA, we're kind of using like lowercase MPA, right? Like not part of the California MPA network, but some other marine protected area that was set aside for conservation. So an example, a few of them off the top of my head, Point Reyes National Seashore, Channel Islands National Park, a couple of the national wildlife refuges. These are areas that are outside the MPA network. They're still MPAs, according to the definition of an MPA, an area that was set aside for ocean conservation, but and it's scored as lightly, right? So Point Reyes is one of those lightly protected MPAs outside the network that we're digging in more closely and seeing, okay, well, exactly why was it assessed as lightly? Is it fishing? Is it aquaculture? Is it infrastructure? And does that actually make sense in the California context? So is that helpful?
Gotcha. Yep, perfect, man. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate the question. I see a question here from Bill. I'm not 100% sure that I'm fully understanding, so please feel free to jump in and clarify. But what I'm hearing here is for track one of the 30 by 30 solicitation, which we just released a couple of months ago, what would be an example of an area that's particularly sensitive per the MPA guide? The MPA guide doesn't really assess like threats to biodiversity. It really only scores regulations. It scores MPAs as fully, highly, lightly, or minimally, just based on the regulations in place there. So what we were asking for in track one of the solicitation is like some science to help us maybe identify areas that are particularly sensitive or subject to that, some kind of biodiversity threat. But the MPA guide doesn't really figure in there. It's more this tool that we're using in the decision tree. And I hope that's helpful. But again, please feel free to jump off mute if not. And I see a question here from Tony. You mentioned Protected Seas Navigator as an open source public platform, utilizing it to avoid bias, but who are the teams of individuals that scan through the content? That's us. That's the OPC team. Me and my team plus Jen. But again, ground truthing that with folks who know those areas, right? So folks from the department, the commission, for some of these deeper dives, maybe reaching out to the communities who are, fishing these areas or working to conserve these areas. So it's us, but also again, in partnership with all those different kinds of groups that I mentioned on that last slide. And then how are varying trophic levels throughout the regions monitored through this platform? That's not really something that shows up on Protected Seas. There aren't really monitoring results. I will say, if you guys go look at Protected Seas, you may see a level of fishing protection score. You can just disregard that because that is not something that we're using in our evaluation. So Protected Seas did a scoring exercise of their own that will show up if you go comb through those individual pages, but We're not using that. We're using for MPAs, we're using the MPA Atlas and the MPA Guide framework. And then for the non-MPA areas, we're working on developing those criteria ourselves in close collaboration with scientific experts. And again, we'll present those in September.
Mike, can I put, if Tomas, if you're still here, I see your question. Would OPC formalize the revocation concept if a 30 by 30 area isn't delivering biodiversity benefits? I'm just hoping you might come off mute and clarify your question.
Yeah, hi Jen.
Hi.
So this is more so regarding like if a conserved area ends up not being effective for biodiversity protections, how would it formally lose its status as a 30 by 30 area?
Got it. Thank you. I mean, I think we are in the process of thinking through how we would clearly articulate what is our intent, that we're not just counting to count, but we're counting because we want to count places that are providing meaningful benefits to biodiversity and that are durable. And so that would be a decision made by the Ocean Protection Council. You know, staff would make a recommendation and then they would you know, make that final determination. But I do think we are talking about actually like putting explicit language or in the evaluation criteria going forward. Like we're going to be continuing to monitor and pay attention to these areas. If there are activities that are happening or new science that comes out that demonstrates that we're not meeting that high biodiversity conservation bar, we're going to revisit. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Jen.
Great.
Thanks, Tomas. So another question from Sherry, clarifying the difference between RCAs, rockfish conservation areas, and essential fish habitat areas. They're two separate things. Yes, 100%. So I was kind of talking about that big umbrella of like fishery management areas and rockfish conservation areas, EFH, other types of fisheries management areas are all kind of individual designations that we're looking at under that big umbrella of fisheries management areas. And then Sherry's pointing out also the Morro Bay offshore wind area was inside EFH. Will offshore wind get a pass on 30 by 30 protections too? The offshore wind, the platforms are in federal waters, and 30 by 30 is a state initiative. So, you know, I don't think this would come up, but, you know, for us, I think the potential impacts of offshore wind infrastructure, I think would be likely not compatible with 30 by 30. But Jen, I might let you weigh in on that one. I'm not sure it's going to come up because they're so far offshore.
Yeah, I mean, the place where this will touch down in state waters is if we're for transmission infrastructure, substations. And again, these are things we're going to need to look to in the future. If we have a protected area that has, you know, renewable energy infrastructure in it, we're going to need to take a look at what the impacts are to biodiversity and reevaluate.
I see a question from Keith. This initiative started in 2020 with a goal of 30% conserved by 2030. Assuming that we get there, when will the ocean actually benefit from new conservation measures and fishery prohibitions? What could be the proposed actions at the end of this designation process? Couple of things. I would not use the term fishery prohibitions for 30 by 30. We're looking at a big tent movement here, and we don't view fisheries, commercial or recreational, as necessarily being incompatible with 30 by 30. It just depends on the biodiversity impact of that fishing. So just a flag on that in case people were picking up on that term. In terms of when the ocean will actually benefit, I hope as we go. I hope that as we implement, at its core, I think 30 by 30 is a way to really drive making good things happen for the ocean. And so I think as we, identify new threats to biodiversity, estuaries have come up a lot, for example, and the fact that big threats to estuaries are, habitat alteration, filling, things like that, water quality. So if we're able to use 30 by 30 as a way to address some of those threats, I think the benefits would start immediately as you see those regulations come online. I think things like the Decadal Management Review have shown that the ocean's already benefiting from MPAs, at least for highly targeted species in some places. So I think it's going to be kind of you'll see benefits accrue as we put more spatial management, measures in place, not necessarily more, but as we drive forward on those 4 different actions that we've prioritized. And then the proposed actions at the end of the designation process, not 100% sure if I'm tracking that question, but I think we've heard a lot. Kind of a common theme on this webinar is like, what's the plan for stewarding 30 by 30 areas into the future? And I think that's something we're really looking at closely, is like, how do we make sure that once an area is designated as a 30 by 30 conservation area, it continues to achieve biodiversity benefit? I think, a lot of that will come down to individual management plans for different types of areas, but it's definitely something we're considering. We don't want to just say, okay, we've designated something as conserved on a map and now it's done, right? So we want to be actively stewarding these areas into the future.
Want me to take this next one from Sandy?
Yeah, yes, please.
Sandy, thanks for the question. She asked if the MPA network is weakened through the adaptive management process, how would that impact how the network counts towards 30 by 30? So I think that depends on what that would look like, right? If we are losing actual overall area of the network protected, I think we might need to, revisit the percentage that we're counting as a total for the network. Because we're counting the network as a whole, if there are changes in regulations, that is something I think we would need to take a better look at to better understand what those changes mean for biodiversity conservation. Mike, anything you would add to that?
No, I think that's perfect. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah. Thanks, Beth.
Yeah, thank you, Beth. That is super helpful. Beth is part of the Marine Conservation Institute MPA Atlas team. And yeah, this thing about the fishing protection score, sorry about my dog there, if you guys can hear that, on what's, the fishing protection score is not something that we're using in the decision tree, right? Okay. Jenny asks, thanks for providing this great information. Can you please clarify if SMRs or SMCAs are being counted similarly for 30 by 30? Yes, again, we're counting the whole MPA network as one giant protected site. Jen, do you want to take one while I quiet my dog down?
Yeah, we can't hear your dog, but
excellent.
I think we might have hit all the questions. Did we miss anything? Oh, Sandy's coming on camera. Did we hit this question from Kim Selko?
Oh, I don't think so. Can you explain how a project like a kelp restoration program could tip the scales to help a managed area be counted towards 30 by 30? Are you choosing the minimum scope and time and space extent of the restoration activities and the metrics of kelp restoration success? We haven't really incorporated restoration into our decision tree. I think we would want to be, for the proposals we're considering for the RFP, we want to be prioritizing restoration that is helping advance conservation in 30 by 30 areas, either whether they're currently counted or whether they could be counted in the future. So it's definitely something we want to consider, but we haven't really baked it in terms of like, okay, if you achieve this increase in kelp canopy cover, like then you would count. So I would say that's something we're kind of actively working through right now. And I think that might be, oh no, I see a couple new ones. Where can I find the specific thresholds used to define biodiversity benefits? Mary, are you asking, if you don't mind coming off mute, maybe, are you asking about kind of the information in the MPA guide and how those like scoring categories were developed?
Yeah, so I have not looked at the guide specifically, so I'm just wondering if they are in there about what these thresholds are and how are they measured to determine whether there are biodiversity benefits or losses.
Yeah, I would definitely encourage you to take a look at our roadmap if you haven't already, and then the MPA guide specifically. Again, just for the MPAs, not necessarily for the non-MPA areas, but you'll find in there that exactly how the authors of the MPA guide are sort of scoring different types of activities that could be happening in the MPA. And again, I think what we're going to be presenting in September will even further refine that by kind of breaking down like those activities, but for a California specific context. So yeah, I would check out the roadmap, check out the MPA guide, and then stay tuned for what we're going to be presenting in September.
Okay, so then for things such as the essential fish habitat, that those thresholds you think that you're going to be developing different threshold evaluation tools? Is that?
Not necessarily well, they will look, I'm wondering how much I want to get into here. The criteria for lightly protected MPAs and for non-MPA areas may look a little bit different because they're different types of areas, just definitionally, but we are really committed to holding the same bar across MPAs and non-MPA areas in terms of what conservation means. So even if they look slightly different, what we don't want to do is have like a bar way up here for highly protected MPAs and a bar way down here for non-MPA areas. We want general kind of functional equivalency across our different categories in our decision tree. Thanks, Mary. Great question. Jen, do you want to take Sherry's question about high resolution geographic mapping?
Yeah, Sherry, I think this is a question that's separate from our 30 by 30 effort and related more broadly to what's happening with offshore wind and the concerns that I know that you and others in your community continue to raise around this. So I might just suggest that we take that one offline here. Happy to follow up with you on that.
Student question come in from Zoe for areas that do not fit under 30 by 30, but you are providing recommendations for. What would the follow-up look like? Would that be a process that goes to CDFW? Really good question. So if we're going to make recommendations for strengthening biodiversity protections in any area, it would be in really close collaboration with the agency that's managing that area. So could be CDFW, but also could be, like I mentioned, our partnership with the feds on National Marine Sanctuary Management, could be the state water boards if we're talking about water quality protection. So yeah, any of those recommendations would be developed and implemented, obviously in really close partnership with the agencies that designate and manage whatever area is in question. Really good question.
I might just jump in here to reiterate a point you made earlier, Mike, in the context of Aubrey's question about MPAs and water quality protection. Just a reminder that the Ocean Protection Council is about to, hopefully in December, finalize our strategic plan for the next 5 years. So while 30 by 30 and a lot of the activities within it are a key core priority of that work, they are not the only thing that the Ocean Protection Council is working on, right? And so a lot of these issues or questions that are coming up in the chat around restoration and offshore wind and fisheries, those all continue to be very high priorities for us going forward. Some of them just don't have that like direct key nexus for the work that we're doing to identify 30 by 30 conservation areas. So just wanted to make sure that was crystal clear to everyone who's here.
Thanks, Jen. And I just dropped a link. If you haven't seen our new strategic plan or our draft new strategic plan that we're driving towards adopting in December, please check it out. Yeah, 30 by 30 is a big part of it, but like Jen said, lots of other good stuff in there. Link is in the chat. I see a question from Eric. I apologize. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to answer that. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, go for it, Jen.
Okay. So Eric, thanks for the question. It's not a dumb one. So the question is, since we're including MPAs in our count, will additional areas continue to have the same severe angling restrictions of the current MPAs? So I just want to clarify. Yes, MPAs are a key foundation of our 30 by 30 strategies. However, we are not making separate 30 by 30 marine protected areas. Any changes to the marine protected area network will go through the adaptive management process with the Fish and Game Commission and the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And those decisions, they're currently considering new petitions for marine protected areas. And so that will go through that process. If the commission and the department determine that they want to change the MPA network, create new marine protected areas, then that will contribute to our total percent conserved for 30 by 30. But we are not striving to get another, getting our additional 8% by creating just another 8% of marine protected areas. So hopefully that answers your question. If I did not do a good job, please come off mute and I will try to clarify.
You answered it quite well. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Eric. Couple of new chats coming in. Seychelles, I hope I'm saying that right. I'd like to be part of Wind Farm, maybe monitoring in Avila Bay and cables coming into Morro Bay. Yeah, I think there's lots of opportunities. Like, I'm happy to connect you if you want to send me an email offline with our offshore wind program manager, who could speak with you more.
Yep, similar for the chat that just came in from Sherry.
Got it. Yeah.
Yep.
Sherry, happy to connect offline and connect you with Abby, who's our offshore wind person, who you may have met already. But yeah, she can get into some of this with you in more detail. Okay.
So I might, in the 3 minutes we have left, one, just say, Mike, huge thanks to you for your incredible work and leadership and presentation here. Thanks to Dr. Lewis, who's here with us and has been a thought partner. We are really excited that everybody came today to share. If you have colleagues or friends who weren't able to join us, we are recording this and we will post it online. Mike, any final words about kind of next steps as we head towards the council meeting, when folks can expect to see that evaluation criteria posted and publicly available? Anything else you want to say in closing?
Yeah. No, I mean, well, first of all, just thanks everybody. Like Jen said, yeah, this was great. This was a conversation, which is really what I was hoping it would be. Really felt like a workshop and a dialogue. So that's awesome. And yeah, in terms of next steps, we will be posting those criteria publicly as a staff report on our website in the lead up to our September 30th meeting. So that's usually just about 10 days before the council meeting happens. So look for those in just a couple of weeks here. And then, yeah, we'll look forward to a public discussion at our council meeting and really kind of launching into the next steps of our evaluation process then. But I think hopefully it's clear, we're really committed to that clarity and that transparency. Our door's always open. So I can put my contact info in the chat. Please drop me a line if you've got more questions or want to chat anything through as we approach that meeting, and hope to see many of you there, either in person or virtually. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thank you.